Well, I'm keeping an eye on the clock here, and I think we should maybe shift over to some solutions. And I'm wondering if you have some uplifting words, Alex, to share with our audience, so they, in case they might feel a little bit overwhelmed and concerned about where they're going, and what might they do to unpack this situation to see how they want to, make an informed decision about what their next step should be.
Yeah, well, there is some really, really good news. I would say some of the best news that I've seen in a long time. We have a massive exodus out of the government's indoctrination system, masquerading as a school system. Just in the last year, they probably lost over 1.5 million victims. The number of enrollments in pre-kindergarten is down like 25%. Kindergarten enrollments are down, I think, almost 15% nationwide. This is really, really good news. The more families flee the government school system, the better off this nation will be, the better chance we have at preventing the destruction of our nation and the destruction of our freedoms. That's incredibly encouraging. On the homeschool front, the news is very, very positive as well. According to the Census Bureau, they just released this data some months ago. The number of families with school-age children that are involved in homeschooling and true homeschooling, right? We're not talking about government brainwashing at home through a computer. We're
Right.
talking about real homeschooling where parents are directing the education of the children. The number of families doing that has now more than doubled just over the last year and a half or so since the COVID pandemic started. It went from about 6% of all families to almost 12% of all families. Some states, my state of Florida, now we have 20% of all families with school age children are homeschooling. States like Alaska, we have, I think it was 28% of families with school age children are homeschooling their children. This is incredible news. It's incredibly encouraging. We need a whole lot more of that. Also, on the encouraging front, when I first started telling people to get their children out of public school years ago, that was really like a radical idea. And well, it'd be nice, but it's not going to happen. So let's think about realistic things, right? What do we do? Let's run for school board, right? And I don't want to discourage people from running the school board, but I really think you're wasting your time. You'd be much better off helping to build lifeboats for the children. So when I started telling people to get their kids out of school, that really was seen as kind of radical, maybe even fringe is a term I heard a few times. Well, the tide has really changed now, and that's incredibly encouraging. I actually just did an article in this new special issue that we did, Save Our Children, about the tide turning. And just in the last couple of years, we have seen a sea change when it comes to this view. We've had people like Rush Limbaugh, for example, the best known, most popular talk radio show host in America, something like 18 million listeners a day. And he died not too long ago. But 3 times, at least, that I can count in the year before he died, he warned people about the dangers of sending their children to these government indoctrination centers. In fact, he explicitly told them, you've got to get your children out, right? You've got to get them out. And God bless him. That is such an important thing to say. I know it takes courage for somebody in his position to say something like that, but he did. And that was a good move. Franklin Graham, one of the most significant evangelical leaders in the world, has actually come out and said a couple of years ago, New Jersey passed this LGBT indoctrination act that all victims of government schools had to be bombarded with the LGBT ideology. And what the Franklin Graham said was, look, parents, he was on a show with what's the guy's name now? One of the big Fox talk show hosts said, parents, you've got to get your children out of the public schools. You got to get them enrolled in a private Christian school or whatever it takes to protect them from this perversion in the schools. We've got President Donald Trump himself. He said multiple times, we've got to protect our children from these failing government schools. And he said it from the biggest platforms that he could have. He said it during the State of the Union speech. He said it during his Independence Day speech on 4th of July or 3rd of July, I guess, at Mount Rushmore last year. Said the reason for the mayhem in our streets is that our children are being indoctrinated in their public schools. So the tide has really turned on this. Parents, by and large, are aware that these school systems are harming their children. I don't know that they all understand the urgency yet, but the trend is now moving in a very good direction. On the one hand, I'm encouraged to see all these parents outraged, hollering at the school board meetings. On the other hand, I think that's a less than productive use of time. It's good. I mean, venture frustration is good. It raises awareness. It shows other parents in the community what's going on. But really, yelling at the school board, you might as well go bang your head against a brick wall. You can yell at the school board all you want, but do the more important thing, and that is take your children out. And that's what's encouraging, that so many families are now doing that. And the school system now the budget time is coming. Oh my goodness, we're in big trouble right away, because they're losing money every time a student leaves. So now they're saying, oh, everybody's going to come back after COVID. Don't worry, we're going to get all the kids back. I don't think that's true. I think they're going to lose millions more children, millions more victims in the years ahead, as parents figure out what's going on here, as they realize that there are alternatives. So I encourage people to spread the word. Get tools like this. This Save Our Children magazine is a really valuable tool to raise awareness in your community. And we've got to get the word out. We've got to protect these children. And I think the only way to do it is to get them out.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. And that's the purpose behind this presentation today, is to help raise awareness. And to those of you who are listening, if you are a subscriber to our channel, thank you. If not, please click on that button and the bell so you'll know when more content is being uploaded. And back on what we were talking about, I heard, Alex, that you can, someone said, even if you take your child out of school and don't put them anywhere else, I mean, unlearning, unschooling, homeschooling, and a lot of people are working full time. They can't necessarily easily do homeschooling. But like you say, the beauty of that is you can schedule that whenever you can fit it in. It doesn't have to be between 9 to 3 or, whatever. You can do it on weekends, evenings, walking in the park. There's always education going on. And we had the opportunity to homeschool last year a delightful young lady. And we learned so much right along with her. And I encouraged her, the best curriculum possible is that of questions. Question everything. So other alternative educational situations you can think of. Alex, I read in your website that you're not necessarily advocating charter schools. And I'm wondering what the difference. I was working with an umbrella school supervisor, and she talked about public charter schools where there's no cost to parents. Are you familiar with those and what the difference might be between a more expensive like Montessori or charter situation versus a public charter?
Yeah, my understanding is that basically all charter schools are ultimately government schools, and that's where the problem comes in.
Um,
Yes, they have a little bit more freedom in certain areas, but they're still bound to use the same Common Core garbage. They're still bound. They still have to ban prayer. They still have to ban the Bible. They still have to teach this fraudulent version of history for the most part. And there's some that get a little bit more latitude. And I know some charter schools that are doing significantly better than traditional government brainwash camps in teaching reading, for example. I found one in the state of Florida, and I saw they were in the top like 0.1% when it came to reading scores in the state. And I called them up and I said, hey, you guys are teaching phonics, aren't you? They're like, yeah, how'd you know? Well, because you're in the top 0.1%, right? You're ignoring the idiot standards, the quackery, and using good things. So that in a sense is good. But I'll give you an example. I was in New Orleans, Louisiana, speaking at a university there, and I had the opportunity to meet a pastor there, a Lutheran pastor, who told me a very sad story. He had a thriving Lutheran school attached to his church. I think they had something like 200 students, or maybe it was 250 students, and they were doing well. And then the government authorized charter schools, and they opened up a charter school not far from his Christian school. And what happened is the charter school peeled away just enough kids from the Christian school that the Lutheran school was forced to shut down. Okay. And that is a tragedy, because now those children, because the parents thought, well, hey, I don't want to send my kids to a normal government brainwash camp. I'd rather get them a Christian education. I'm willing to pay for that. But hey, here's an option that's free, so-called, and it's not as bad as a normal government school. So let's just do that, and we'll save the $5,000 or $10,000 a year or whatever it is. And that's a tragedy. So I'm very concerned about charter schools because they crowd out independent options and true Christian schools, and also because they are at the end of the day, government schools, and most of the problems that we have in traditional government schools are still there. So as far as options go, I really recommend people completely separate from the government when it comes to educating your children. That means homeschooling, or truly independent private schools that you have vetted. And I think that's critical. If you're going to trust a private school with your children, make sure you do the vetting, make sure you ask the right questions, because unfortunately, a lot of private schools today are more woke than the government brainwash camps, including some of the ones that you pay, $40,000 a year to send your kids to. So a serious warning for parents: don't just trust your kids to any private school. And I think the next front, and when we're seeing this develop already now, the government's saying, hey, we want to give you money, right? We're going to give homeschoolers free money. Come on, you already pay property taxes. Why don't we just give it some of it back to you? Or we'll do vouchers, and we'll let you choose to whatever private school you want. We'll give you free money. We'll call it school choice, and isn't that great? Well, we saw where that went. I was actually living in Sweden when they had this school choice, and they had the vouchers, and the money will follow the child. Exact same rhetoric that we have here. And what happened? Well, in 2011, 2012, they passed the Education Reform Act. And what they did was they said every private school taking government funds through these vouchers is now a de facto government school. They have to teach the government's insane curriculum. They have to ban prayer. They have to ban the Bible. And so what they did was they essentially nationalized every school in Sweden. And in the same legislation, they banned homeschooling. So I'm worried about something similar here, right? Right now, they say, oh, you can send your kid to a Christian school with these vouchers, no problem. Well, wait a couple years. And we've already seen this in Florida now. All the lying fake media, they're pounding the drum. Oh my goodness, the schools are teaching the kids that the Bible is true. Oh my goodness, they're discriminating. They don't want to hire a guy with a dress and some demon horns to run the kindergarten classroom because they're bigoted Christians. We need to regulate them because they're getting government money. That's the threat right there, Christine. So I encourage people to try independent options. We've got a lot listed over at publicschoolexit.com for parents who are interested. Try to help you get guided through the process. And a lot of options out there. There's never been a better time to get out of the government system, but you got to do it. You got to pull the trigger.
Wonderful. And I appreciate your talking. I was going to say, speaking of Sweden, I understand they banned homeschooling, but you answered that question just fine. So I wanted to ask you about that. This sounds great. And I'll be including links like what you mentioned. And are you ready for a quick little session of question and answer before we let you go? We have one here
Sure. Yep.
from Cape Town, South Africa. Denise, and she says, hi from Cape Town. Finding the discussion riveting. Thank you, Dee. Regarding critical race theory, wait for the banning of schools to follow in the U.S. schools. I recently donated most of my beloved books to a local library, but retained my copy of the literary masterpiece To Kill a Mockingbird, described by a teacher as causing racial trauma in Black children with its white saviorism. And yes, some teachers in the U.S. want Shakespeare banned for portrayal of misogyny and racism. Frightening, to say the least. So.
Hi, Denise. Thank you for the question. And actually, I used to live in Cape Town. I lived in Blaubergstrand. So big fan of Cape Town and South Africa. Thank you for the question. Actually, I think South Africa is kind of the model of what they want to do to the United States ultimately.
Really?
Oh yeah. Probably a topic for another day. But a lot of what they did in South Africa to bring the communists to power, we see the same tactics, the same lies being peddled in the United States. Very real parallels there. Yes, the banning of classic books has started, and including Shakespeare. I mean, that's in the past now. A lot of school districts have taken these books out, classics of literature, to make way for studying garbage like Ibram Kendi, the critical race theory monger who thinks there should be a department of anti-racism that would be a total dictatorship with the power to overturn any policy at the local, state, or federal level if it might in any way contribute to unequal outcomes or whatever. Unbelievable stuff that we're seeing. So yes, that's coming. It's already here. And we need to be very careful if we don't want to end up like South Africa. And for those of you who don't know what South Africa has ended up like, I encourage you to read some of my reporting there. I've written very extensively on South Africa in many publications. I've lived it, used to live there. I moved down there when I was 18 years old. And same exact thing, same exact process. It's happening. And we've got to be very, very careful.
Thank you for that, and I'm sure Denise appreciates that. She's really stays on top of things, and she sent me a lot of information of things happening in the U.S. usually right as they're happening, and I thought she's right on top of things. So she's just a wonderful supporter. and I appreciate your addressing that. And I didn't know if you wanted to touch upon the epidemic of violence, suicide in our children. I know a little bit of that exposure to the Wi-Fi radiation contributes to that a bit, but also conditions in the school system do as well. And also they're looking to do away with the police presence in some schools, and that might take away from the security. Do you think it's really important to have the police presence in schools? I know we didn't have that back in the dark ages, but maybe it's necessary now. But
Unfortunately, it is, and I think the reason it is necessary is because of what the schools are teaching. Right, we had no school shootings for decades in this country. Right, it wasn't a thing that kids would come in and shoot each other. It wasn't a thing that kids would commit suicide. This is a new phenomenon, and they come up with all these excuses. Oh, we don't have enough funding for mental health counselors. They didn't have mental health counselors 60, 70, 80 years ago, and yet they didn't have kids hanging themselves. They didn't have kids shooting heroin into their arms. They didn't have kids aborting their babies. These are all new developments, and they're a direct result of the garbage, of the diabolical worldview that's being taught to our children. They are being taught the Marxist materialist worldview that holds that really there is no purpose, there is no meaning to your life. You're just a biological meat robot. Just a series of chemical reactions, some crazy series of accidents caused you to exist. There is no meaning to life. Just have as much fun as you possibly can, and that is the goal of life. And then after that, nothing. Right. And so when you teach little children this, when you teach them that their life is no more valuable than the life of their goldfish at home, that causes despair. It causes trauma. It's also false. It's a lie from the pit of hell. But when that is what children are taught 5 days a week, 7 days, or 5 days a week for 7 hours a day for 12, 13, 14, 15, 17 years, that takes a toll. And that leads to a situation where children are despairing. They're willing to use violence. They're being taught that there is no such thing as right and wrong. If there's no right and wrong, how can it be wrong to commit suicide? How can it be wrong to shoot other kids? Right? There is no right and wrong. You just think it's wrong because of your bigoted religious beliefs, right? And that's simply crazy. But that is what has happened in our school system. So I think the only way, the police are really like putting a Band-Aid on an amputated leg.
oh,
It's not going to stop the bleeding. The bleeding is eventually going to kill the patient. The Band-Aid might help a teeny tiny little bit in the meantime, but the real solution is to stop teaching diabolical lies and start teaching the children the truth, that they were created in the image of God, that they have a purpose in this life, that there is right and wrong, that murder and thievery and rape and adultery, that all of these things are inherently wrong. There is a right, there is a wrong. Until we get back to that, until we get back to real legitimate education, I think we're going to see this spiral further and further out of control.
totally agree. And it's like they don't realize their consequences for their actions.
Yep.
And I think this would be a good place to share a quick John Taylor Gatto quote. This was once a land where every sane person knew how to build a shelter, grow food, and entertain one another. Now we've been rendered permanent children. It's the architects of forced schooling who are responsible for that. And from what I can tell, the main thing that children are being taught in public school is how to be obedient, how to be good soldiers. And that's just so sad. It's amazing. And
Yep.
I know we're running a little tight, but when forced vaccination in public schools, not just for the jab that they're talking about now, but important medical decisions should be made by parents in consultation with doctors, not by government bureaucrats in schools, like flu
Yep.
shots.
Yep. It's outrageous that the government has usurped these decision-making powers from parents. But I hope what it will do is just encourage more people to leave the school system. When you have the government trying to decide, make the medical decisions for your children, you should realize that there's a real problem and you should opt out of any such system.
Absolutely. That's really good. We're getting near the end to end on that. I did have a question submitted wondering if it's true that it's a felony to knowingly endanger a child. I would think the answer to that would be yes. If one is presented with knowledge that there is a potential hazard to a child and goes forth with that potential hazard, it sets themselves up for a legal battle, committing a felony. Should maybe, if that's true, should they be made aware that if they continue, they are at risk of being held liable for such actions? Could
Yeah,
that
they
be a
absolutely should
solution?
be, and virtually every state has laws against child endangerment, child abuse. Many of these are felony statutes, and I think these really should be applied. Sam Blumenfeld and I, in Crimes of the Educators, actually call for actual prosecutions of the people involved, and not your brainwashed teacher that got 4 years of brainwashing at a college of education somewhere, but the people responsible for this abuse of our children. They absolutely should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I mean, it's unconscionable. And yeah, we do have those laws across state. We have a lot of laws across the United States that would be perfectly adequate for prosecuting a lot of these criminals, and they should be prosecuted. Yeah, I've interviewed some doctors on these issues. I encourage people to go check those out. I'm very concerned about it, and I think you should be also. I'm not a medical expert or a doctor, but I've interviewed some, and they had some very alarming things to say. I hope people go check those out. Most of our uncensored videos on these topics you can find on Rumble and BitChute and Brighteon, because YouTube has been censoring all of the doctors that we've been interviewing, unfortunately. So.
Absolutely. Good advice on that as well. Alex, any final word before we've run you over your time limit? Thank you for your being so generous with your time today. Um, this has been so strong.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Christine. It's been a real pleasure. For the people who were posting in the chat box, not only have I been in contact with USPI, I'm on their advisory board. Wonderful, wonderful organization to shut down the U.S. Department of Education. As for defunding government schools, that is the goal. I think our rallying cry should be defund government indoctrination centers. Forget defund the
Really,
police. We
I
need our
have never
police.
heard that. That is most encouraging.
Yeah, and it's actually happening now. With this mass exodus of children out of the schools, they're going to lose funding. And virtually every state has a formula for the government indoctrination system based on how many butts they have in chairs. And if
Right?
they lose, 5% of the victims, they're going to lose at least 5% of their budget. And I think that's good. I think we should push for that. Really, we need our police. Our police are keeping us safe. They're protecting our lives, our liberty, our property, our
Agreed.
rights. So we
Yes.
want our police to be here. We don't want criminals to be able to run wild. What we don't need is the government brainwashing our children, telling our children that they might have been born in the wrong body, telling our children that our nation is evil and should be dismantled, telling them that they're evil for the amount of melanin they have in their skin. That is all ridiculous, and that should be defunded. And I know that sounds like an implausible idea right now, but 200 years ago, the idea that the government should run our education system was not only implausible, it would have sounded absolutely preposterous to a normal person to say, hey, we should take the responsibility over the education of children from parents and from churches, and we should give it to the government. People would have said, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. So it's only been 200 years since these stupid ideas have been floating around. Maybe we might not get the schools defunded this year or even 10 years from now, but give it time. I think the American people eventually will realize we made a tragic, horrific mistake by trusting the government to educate so-called our children, and it's like a cancer. People talk about reforming the public school. Why would you want to reform a cancer? You don't want to reform a cancer. You want to cut the cancer out and get rid of it so you can be cured of it. The government school system is a cancer. It doesn't need to be reformed. We don't need to polish the brass on the Titanic. We don't need to rearrange the deck chairs. We need to get into the lifeboats and build entirely new systems. So I think it is plausible. I think that ultimately must be our objective. Defund the government brainwash camps, total separation of school and state. Just like parents are in charge of feeding their children and tucking their children into bed at night, they also should be responsible for educating their children. And that's all I have. If people want to learn more, you can go to my personal website, libertysentinel.org. Our education ministry, I'm the executive director at Public School Exit. We want to help you get your children out of the schools. Share it with your pastors. If you want some resources, we've got these here, very affordable, easy to read. We've got Rescuing Our Children and Save Our Children. You can get those from The New American, thenewamerican.com. I hope people will check those out. You can order 100 copies and give them to others. I did write Crimes of the Educators, if you want the history of how they turned our nation into illiterates. I wrote that with Dr. Samuel Blumenfeld, who passed away. And
It's
that's all I have.
wonderful.
So
I'm reading
thank you
that
again,
now.
Christine.
It's absolutely wonderful. And thank you. And, every like you say that, can you think of any major change for the positive that's happened in history? Which one did not start out as a preposterous idea? And then you keep working it away. And here in Colorado, in our area, there have been 5 major schools that have been shrinking down and down and down, where they're working on consolidation efforts. So I see the trend happening, and that pleases me a great deal. And I know with my group, Wired Schools, we've been pushing to get the schools wired. Do not keep irradiating our children. There are cancers and there's suicide clusters that we're monitoring, and children are having heart attacks they're getting pacemakers because of this exposure to this. You've got to wire the schools. But you know what? I don't believe, like you say, I think it's time to give up on reforming and may have helping them turn things around, because it's like you say, it's like beating your head. So let's just back out and say, okay, pull our children out, and that will do it. So
Amen.
thank you so very much.